L'honorable chef de l'opposition.
The results are in on the Prime Minister's radical liberalization of hard drugs. He teamed up with the BC NDP to decriminalize fentanyl, crack, and heroin. He lowered jail sentences for mass producers of deadly fentanyl. And 80% of the fentanyl made in Canada is done so using ingredients that are not even regulated, but come right into our country where they're cooked into that poison, now threatening our trade relationship with the U.S. Will he reverse his radical liberal drug agenda to save lives and jobs?
Please do what's best for Canada.
Speaker, unfortunately, we've seen that the Conservative leader's answer to this terrible tragedy hitting so many Canadians with the toxic drug epidemic is to stand for photo ops in front of encampments and try to use them for cheap votes. Exploiting Canadians is not the way.
He's educating people.
We've anchored ourselves in science, in working in partnership with municipalities, with frontline workers, with provinces, working with the United States on precursor chemicals, working to invest in supports, wraparound supports, including housing for people suffering from homelessness and the drug crisis. We will continue to be there for people.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The results are in. His radical liberalization of hard drugs has led to a 200% increase in overdose deaths. 47,000 people have died. The worst deaths have been in NDP-controlled BC, where the liberalization has been the most extreme. Worse, he's allowing 80% of the precursor chemicals used to make fentanyl come in unregulated and legally over our border to be used by criminals who get out because he softened the sentences. Now our trade relationship is threatened over it. Will he reverse this disastrous experiment to save the jobs and the lives of Canadians?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what has become increasingly clear through the Leader of the Opposition's little performances
There's something wrong with Trudeau today.
Care about Canadians and about people suffering. He is there for a clip, he's there for a photo op, but he's not there to do the work of delivering based on science, based on compassion, based on a public health approach on dealing with the toxic drug epidemic. He is instead continuing to try to score cheap political points on the backs of the most vulnerable. That's not serious. That's not responsible, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
He almost called him Prime Minister.
Is allowing 80% of the chemicals used in fentanyl manufacturing to come in unregulated and legally. What is not responsible is decriminalizing crack, heroin, and fentanyl, and then after you see that it leads to a massive increase in deaths, then 2 weeks ago, he, the Bloc, and the NDP all voted in favor of a committee report to decriminalize fentanyl right across the country at a time when Canadians are dying and our border could be closed. Will the Prime Minister confirm that he has reversed himself and now opposes decriminalization of fentanyl?
Clean up the streets.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, once again, we see the priority of the Leader of the Opposition is to exploit and use Canadians who are suffering to score cheap political points. Meanwhile, we do the serious work amongst parliamentarians across different orders of government with partners around the world to address this in a way that is grounded in science, not ideology, that works with frontline workers, makes investments in wraparound services, and puts everything forward to try and save lives as best we possibly can. That's what Canadians deserve, not the kind of cheap partisanship that this Leader of the Opposition continues to demonstrate every time he stands up in this House. It is absolutely irresponsible.
Give me a break.
I feel the Prime Minister doesn't understand how serious this situation is. The National Assembly of Quebec voted unanimously for an end to the religious exception, and the Jewish community in Quebec and Canada is afraid. Due to the federal government's lack of action, people can openly incite to violence against the Jewish community. So if the Prime Minister shows that he's serious, we will also be serious. If he says that he's willing to do something about this, we will unblock Parliament for 24 hours. Order, please. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we see that the Bloc Québécois is open to doing something here, but we would like to see that kind of readiness when it comes to other initiatives. For example, improving the healthcare system for the most vulnerable, which is blocked due to conservative filibustering. Same thing for dental care, also blocked by the Conservatives. Or we would like them to help us be able to work on our online harms bill, C-63, which would protect people throughout the country, especially children. We would like to be able to debate all these things in Parliament, but unfortunately, the Bloc Québécois is continuing to let the Conservatives to make it all grind to a halt. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Well, I don't think the Prime Minister liked my idea. It's a matter of leadership. It's a matter of courage. It's a matter of consistency. We have courage. I'm simply proposing the same thing as the Prime Minister already did for the GST break. We're proposing the same thing to protect the Jewish community. We will unblock Parliament. We will pass this. We will feel good about what we've accomplished. And then who knows? If the government has other good ideas that don't interfere with Quebec, who knows? Order, please. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we always come back to this matter of so-called interference with Quebec. The Bloc Québécois thinks that an initiative that would help seniors go to the dentist involves trampling on Quebec's jurisdiction. We are here to help seniors throughout the country, including in Quebec. We are here to improve old age security for seniors.
Yeah, he's literally making life for seniors worse.
We are here to invest for those who need it most. And unfortunately, even when we created childcare spots throughout the country, the Bloc Québécois only wanted to talk about interfering with Quebec. We're here for all Canadians, including Quebecers.
The Prime Minister has lost the control of the cost of housing, which has doubled since he became Prime Minister. And just this week, the OECD published a report showing that Toronto and Vancouver are now the two most expensive housing markets in all of North America. Vancouver's housing is significantly more expensive than Seattle, even though Vancouverites make half as much money. Toronto's housing is more expensive than New York, even though New Yorkers make 50% more. Will the Prime Minister call a housing tax election so that we can bring it home?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
No, Mr. Speaker, the Conservative leader has been having a rough few weeks since he promised he would be shutting down housing projects across the country. Even his Conservative MPs have been going around behind his back complaining to the CBC that they can no longer advocate for their communities, complain that they're no longer allowed to stand up for their mayors who need investments in housing in their communities. He prefers to muzzle his MPs than allow them to be their voice in their communities. His commitment to cut billions of dollars of investments from housing will not help anyone, Mr. Speaker. That's why we're delivering for Canadians.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, we don't complain to the CBC, we complain about the CBC. I digress. The Prime Minister says
that was pretty good.
More money to local bureaucracies, they'll speed up home building. So he gave $500 million to Toronto City Hall. What happened? Home building slowed down by 40%. He gave Vancouver City Hall $115 million, and housing construction slowed down 15%. Gave $176 million to Ottawa City Hall, construction down 22%. When will he learn that what we need in this country is to build homes, not bureaucracy?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, mayors across the country, including in Conservative-held ridings, are speaking out about the reckless cuts the Conservative leader is proposing to money that municipalities need to increase densification, to accelerate permitting, to move forward on home building faster and faster across this country. The Conservative leader is standing against what his own MPs are asking for when he's telling mayors across the country he's going to pull billions of dollars away of investments in housing that will respond to Canadians' needs to be able to grow the economy and live securely for the future.
L'Honorable Chef de l'Opposition.
So he gives tax dollars to big city politicians. And then he gives tax dollars to CBC to interview those big city politicians to say that they like getting the money. Mr. Speaker, if giving more money to big city politicians were going to solve the problem, we'd have the most affordable housing in the world. After revenues for cities has grown twice as fast as inflation and population combined for 2 decades in a row. We don't need more money for bureaucracy and politicians. We need money in the pockets of home buyers and home builders. So why not my common sense plan to axe the sales tax, GST, and bring down housing costs by 50 grand?
It's a good start, that's for sure.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we're seeing the clear pattern of the Conservative leader. He picks fights with journalists, he picks fights with mayors and city councils, he even picks fights with the Team Canada approach that is standing up for Canada's interests, faced with real challenges from the incoming administration to our south. He is choosing to pick fights and divide Canadians at a time when we should be pulling together to solve the challenges of housing, solve the challenges brought in by the new American administration. These are moments for us to pull together. Unfortunately, that's something of which this Conservative leader seems incapable.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Hiking taxes, debt, and inflation to pay off politicians in exchange for press releases and photo ops will not solve the problem. What it has done is doubled housing costs and made Toronto and Vancouver the most expensive housing markets in North America, worse than New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and many other places with more people and money and much less land. So here's a choice. He's afraid of a carbon tax election. Why don't we have a different kind? Why don't we have a housing tax election where he proposes to give money to politicians?
Lots of options for you,
to put it
Trudeau.
in the pockets of home buyers.
Lots of options for you, Trudeau. Pick one.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if he really wanted to put money in the pockets of Canadians, he wouldn't have voted against the Canada Child Benefit. He wouldn't have voted against our initiatives to cut taxes for Canadians over the next 2 months. He wouldn't have voted against initiatives like the Canada Carbon Rebate that puts more money in the pockets of 8 out of 10 Canadian families across the country as we fight climate change and reduce emissions. He continues to seek to divide and pick fights amongst Canadians while we are offering solutions that both support Canadians now and build a stronger and more prosperous economy into the future. That's what we're going to keep doing, Mr. Speaker.
Nobody believes that, unfortunately for you, buddy.
Honourable Member for London Left Fanshawe.
The holidays fast approaching, people in Ontario are scrambling. This Liberal government has let grocery prices soar to pad the pockets of CEOs. Canadians are paying far more for far less. Ontario food banks are cutting back. The surge in demand has surpassed the capacity and resources. Liberals have let people down. Worse, Conservatives won't fix it. They will cut and make life harder for the working class. Why are the Liberals leaning on food banks to fix the affordability crisis they created?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
I remember a time when the NDP stood up for workers across this country. But when we put forward a proposal to send a $250 check to working Canadians right across the country, to anyone who worked last year and made less than $150,000, they stood against it. They said no, they won't support being there for working Canadians. Of course, we will continue to look at doing more for seniors and more for young people, but recognizing hardworking Canadians who stepped up and got us through the pandemic, got us through this inflation crisis, turning their backs on workers like the Conservatives are, is really a shame to see from the NDP.
I'm going to... Order, please. I'm going to ask the Honourable Member from Hamilton Centre, please, to not take the floor when not recognized by the House. The Honourable Member for Nunavut.
The Chiefs of Ontario are calling for improved accountability of the non-insured health benefits program and access to mental health services. First Nations and Inuit are not consulted or invited to participate when selecting cultural support providers for their communities. As a result, unqualified people with criminal records are enrolled as service providers. When will the Liberals meaningfully work with First Nations and Inuit to improve accountability and access to appropriate mental health services?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Kuyanamik for your question, her question, Mr. Speaker. The reality is the AFN chiefs are right now engaged in a review of the entire program. We will continue to work with Indigenous leadership across this country to make sure we are fulfilling our responsibilities to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to be healthy, everyone gets the services and supports that they need. We know this is part of the long journey of reconciliation that we have embarked upon as a country. We will continue to be there as a full partner in this and all other difficult discussions.
There we go.
The honourable member for Davenport.
Mr. Speaker, recent reporting about India's alleged interference in the Conservative Party leadership race
Oh, come on, man.
across the country, including my constituents in Davenport. All members of this House have a responsibility to take national security seriously. That is especially true of our party leaders, including the leader of the opposition who refuses to get a security clearance. Can the Prime Minister explain the efforts to protect our national security against foreign interference?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for Davenport for her question. Allegations of Indian foreign interference in Conservative leadership races are alarming, but they're not new. They were highlighted in the NSICOP report. They were highlighted by the public inquiry into foreign interference. Yet, the Conservative leader refuses to get the top secret clearance necessary so he can be fully briefed up on threats to his party, to his colleagues, and to our democracy. It is inexplicable to the vast number of Canadians why he refuses to take the top secret briefings that would keep Canada.
Dude, he's got Chinese foreign interference people sitting in the front bench
I've asked this question of
of the Liberal Party.
House. I'll ask the honourable member from Edmonton West, as well as the member from St. Albert, Edmonton, to please not take the floor unless requested by the chair.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr.
Oh, this is embarrassing for
Inflation
Trudeau.
is rising. After the inflationary spending of this Prime Minister, in fact, all four measures of inflation are higher than the Bank of Canada's target rate. And this Prime Minister's electioneering and inflationary spending will make it harder for the Bank of Canada to reduce interest rates. Interest rates on Canadians who are already struggling to pay for food and housing. Once again, this Prime Minister said he would cap his inflationary deficits at $40 billion. Will he do that? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, over the last few years, we have invested in measures to help Canadians who are struggling, whether it be dental care, whether it be more child care spaces, whether it be school food programs. These investments were all made to help Canadians. But despite these programs, inflation is nonetheless back within the Bank of Canada's target range. Now, we are bringing forward a tax break for all Canadians. But the Conservative Party is voting against that because they only care about partisanship.